Welcome to Pop-O-Holics, the show about hot takes hotter than hot tasty pancakes. Where this month, we're talking about... Cage!
Should have done video for that one.
I'm gonna say now River is wide awake.
He's already awake right now. Welcome to Pop-O-Holics, show about hot takes hotter than hot tasty pancakes. I'm your host, Christian Cady, and I'm joined as always by my two favorite co-hosts.
Chris Conkling.
And Brian Dupree.
I had to psych myself up for that one. That was a long sustain right there.
It was great.
Very well.
Thanks.
Excellent.
I'm very lightheaded. I haven't played a show in a long time, and that reminded me of that. All right, so what is Pop-Holics? Well, we theme our months every month, and we talk about a special something that's around a new release or something we're excited about. And with the release of our subject matter for this episode, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, Nick Cage's new film, all Nick Cage, Super Nick Cage. Guess what? We're doing a Nicolas Cage month, Nicolas Mayge, which is the best name that anybody can come up with for a month that is set in May about Nicolas Cage.
I think it's great.
Can't be topped.
Nailed it. First try.
I really did rack my brain for a long time to think of a better name because I hate the name.
The only thing that would have been better is if we themed the rest of the movies around sorcerer movies that Nicolas Cage has
All
been
those
in.
movies are bad. So
They are all bad.
we came up with a better list. So we're doing that new movie, which it's just so many words. Now I'm defeating the purpose of it, but I don't want to repeat it until I actually
The
introduce
Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent.
Now we got the worst of worst worlds. What else are we covering this month, Chris, for our Nicolas Cage extravaganza?
I believe we've yet to lock down an official list,
I
but
thought-
I believe
I thought we had it. I thought we had Raising Arizona, Face Off, and
Face Off and Leaving Las Vegas, right?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Look,
I don't know
Raising Arizona, Face Off, and Leaving Las Vegas. Here it is, written in stone in the recording. Those are the movies we're watching now, which I think is a great list. You know, those are all very good Nicolas Cage movies. So my wife is a huge Nicolas Cage fan, and I just want to get this out here right now at the top of the episode. I tried to convince her to record 2-minute segments talking about her favorite Nicolas Cage movies, which consist of like Next and National Treasure, you know,
the best ones,
movies that
the ones
she,
that
she loves,
we don't have
and
the balls
it makes me
to
really
cover.
happy that she loves them. But you know, just to cover a larger scope of Nicolas Cage films, she could like catch the ones that maybe aren't as great, but she really enjoys. But she said no.
I think we could dedicate a whole year to Nicolas Cage with the amount of...
without a doubt, with the number of movies that we could literally go for 2 years, I think, if we watched one movie a week.
Yeah. Brian, you excited about this
Large
month?
catalog.
I am super excited about this month. I have not seen all of Nicolas Cage's movies, but he's the type of actor who is just consistently interesting in everything that I've seen him in, even in the movies that aren't particularly good. Vampire's Kiss was one that a friend showed to me in college, and it's like, that is quite something.
That was a movie.
It is incredible. For those of you who don't know, this is the movie where Nicolas Cage is under the impression that he is becoming a vampire, and he's also a kind of douchebag yuppie on top of it, and those things combined is just a stew of absolute insanity. And yeah, I can't not love the guy. He's just doing a lot all the time.
Yeah, I think not everybody's a Nicolas Cage fan, but everybody likes a Nicolas Cage movie, right? And mine are, it's so crazy when you talk to people about Nicolas Cage shit they like. Mine are always weird. You know, we're going to cover some of his seminal works that I'm excited to finally finish Raising Arizona, which I've had forever, and something pulled me away from it. I just never finished it. And I've never seen Face Off all the way through, and I've never seen Leaving Las Vegas. So I'm very excited to get into the movies that we're covering specifically. But like, if you're like, hey, favorite Nick Cage movies, I'm like Matchstick Men. I love The Weathermen.
Weatherman. I forgot about that. Oh
I
my God.
loved Lord of War, but I think I just didn't see enough movies. You know, I look back at Lord of War, I'm like, there's a lot better movies than Lord of War, but I really liked that movie when it came out, and it's very serviceable is the word. The Rock, come on, Michael Bay at his prime with Sean Connery. Come on.
I don't think I've ever seen The Rock.
Oh,
Nor have I.
It
Nor
is,
have I.
Chris, it is quintessential 90s action. And it is in many ways a perfect movie, in my opinion. It's very,
I was a
very
big National Treasure fan, I gotta say. Shout out to Mickey for loving those. I think both those movies are great. And I gotta say, I'm a defender of the Ghost Rider movies.
Okay.
I think
You did
there is
recently
a
rewatch
lot.
those.
I did. Well, I hadn't seen. This was my first time watching them. Pretty much. I think I had maybe seen part of the first one, but I think those movies held up astonishingly well, considering how poorly they were received.
You know, I haven't seen the first Ghost Rider in a very long time, and we had this conversation when you were rewatching them, but I've never seen the second one. So considering that this month is Nicolas Mayge, I might go back on my own and finally check that out.
Second one might be the superior of the two. It's
I'm just disappointed because those
High bar.
those movies had a clear writer. And from my understanding, they weren't ghost written. Anyway, so
Oh boy.
we all have
boy.
varying degrees of Nicolas Cage love here. We love him to certain extents, but we're all like fans of. We covered Mandy, which is a Nicolas Cage movie
Yeah.
that we all
Yeah.
really like.
Dude, we haven't even mentioned
One of my
what
favorites
is it,
from
the
last year.
Wicker Man, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh, The Wicker Man. Yep.
Not the bees.
I gotta say that one, the original, is multiple steps above that from what I remember. I've only seen both of them once, but yeah, The Bees is great.
Brad's got to throw it old school. Well, we're going to get into a lot of that throughout the month, but we're here to talk about the reason for the season, which is the unbearable weight of massive talent.
What's the worry here, Nick? You've lost some of your talent as an actor?
No. What did he say?
He says he loves you, but he went in a different direction.
I'm done. I'm quitting acting. Tell the trades, it was a tremendous honor to be a part of storytelling and myth-making.
Ah, fuck, man, I'm driving through the hills. I'm sorry. One more time.
We got another offer. It's $1 million. It's to attend a wealthy gentleman's birthday party.
I would never do that.
It's the easiest gig ever. You play yourself.
What do we know about this guy anyway? Is he into something strange?
It's not like he's gonna
Want you to suck his dick or fuck his wife or watch him fuck his wife.
I wouldn't think so.
Welcome to Mallorca, Mr. Cage.
The guy that owns this house, what's his name?
Javi.
Is Javi gonna want me to,
I am Javi.
Nick Cage. God, this place is stunning.
What is your favorite movie?
That's one of those questions that's impossible to answer. You can't just limit it to one.
Imagine me and you, I do.
Is it too much? Is this supposed to be me? It's grotesque. I'll give you 20,000 for it.
That is from the trailer of The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, directed by Tom Gormican, I believe in his directorial debut, written by Tom Gormican and Kevin Etten, score by Mark Isham, cinematography by Nigel Bluck. With a budget of $30 million, at this point, after opening weekend, it has grossed $11 million. We're recording this on the Thursday before its second weekend. And it stars Nicolas Cage as Nick Cage, Pedro Pascal, Sharon Horgan, Tiffany Haddish, Ike Barinholtz, Alessandra Mastronardi, and Jacob Scipio. And this is the movie where Nicolas Cage goes to visit, goes to a private gig that he's being paid money for, and chaos ensues. Diabolical plot. I believe the CIA is involved. It's real wacky. But we're going to be talking about our non-spoiler thoughts, our standout moments, and our final thoughts when we go into spoilers. So we'll have a pre-spoiler thing. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, use our first little bits to see whether it's going to be right for you, and then we'll have a spoiler talk if you've seen the film or if you just don't give a shit. So, gentlemen, what did we think of The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent? Chris, let's start with you.
So as I mentioned, my wife is a huge Nicolas Cage fan. So this obviously was like a must-see in theaters. Not only because we were recording this episode for the podcast, but, for that reason alone. I absolutely loved this movie. One of the things that I find fun about Nick Cage, and I've mentioned before that I'm not the biggest Nick Cage fan out of the three of us. Sometimes I find his performances to be incredibly obnoxious, but what's best about Nick Cage is when he's leaning into like this kind of almost like mythical caricature version of who he is as a person and an actor, like leaning into this, like, I'm going to say it, quintessential Nick Cage craziness that he tends to. And this movie is just 1000% that. Like, he said initially he was concerned about being in this movie because the person that the Nick Cage that he's representing, the Nick Cage with a K that he's representing in this movie, is kind of like this caricature, what Hollywood and pop culture has built him up to be as a person. And it's actually far from how he actually is in his personal life, despite all these like almost urban legends about who Nick Cage is as a person. But I really loved his portrayal of this fictional version of himself in this film. I found it to be absolutely hysterical. There were multiple times over the course of the movie where I found myself painfully relating to the person that Nick Cage is, even though he and I couldn't have lives so far apart from one another. There are multiple instances where my wife literally turned and stared at me in the theater as Nick Cage was like talking about film and stuff. Like, me at my worst as a film fan has said things that were said in this movie, but she and I couldn't help but like laugh in those moments because it was just so painfully relatable. The way the movie unfolds, it's a very meta narrative, which is always a lot of fun. And the relationship that he has with Javi in the film, Pedro Pascal's character, I mean, the chemistry between the two of them is just absolute comedic gold. Like, they have such wonderful chemistry, and they're the heart of this movie, and they just make the whole experience so enjoyable. You know, I texted you guys after I got out of the film, and I said I think this movie might be a contender for like at least the top 3 my favorite films or best films of 2022. So yeah, I had an exceptional time
Not
watching
since
the
the
Unbearable
story
Weight.
of Fire Saga has there been film
Early contender.
early contender.
Yeah, we'll see if it makes it all the way to the end of the year. But I had an exceptional time from start to finish. This film was great. Entertainment at its best.
Awesome to hear.
How do you guys feel about
Brian,
it?
let's get your considerably less hot take. Your considerably lower lukewarm. I'm curious. I'm curious to see how much you enjoyed this film. What did you think?
It's funny you say that. I gotta start by saying that my theater experience definitely colored my viewing of this.
Shame.
It was a Monday 9 p.m. showing. Granted, the weekend that it came out, but I was not expecting this movie theater to be as packed as it was. I ended up getting a seat in the center of the second row, which is pretty close to the screen. Which pretty much
Suboptimal.
entirely filled up, and I ended up moving to the front row just so I wouldn't have to be next to anyone. Not the ideal way to watch any movie. So I will say, and there was a guy coughing, a couple behind me coughing throughout the entire movie. So I was just a little bit distracted throughout the course of this movie. But with that being said, this movie is consistently really funny. I was laughing out loud throughout the entirety of it. I feel like I didn't get all of the references that they were making to some of his movies, but I don't think the movie really depends on it. I think the humor and the plot drives forward enough to where if you get it, it's there, and there are a bunch of nods, but it's not required to really enjoy this movie. Even though it does have a little bit, it has attempts at some emotional stuff and a little bit of sweetness, I think it really is just a pure comedy for the most part. With, you know, a little bit of action thriller sprinkled in at various points throughout it. There are some cool editing transitions that the movie's not particularly showy visually, but there were a couple of moments where I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting filmmaking that's happening here.
It's funny you read it that way. I read it as a cutting room floor decision to make the narrative more palpable, make the runtime less. I don't know what they were doing, but there's one in particular that we'll get to in spoilers. You'll probably need to remind me that I was like, I don't know if they did this on purpose, but interesting that you say that. I don't think it's a terribly edited film. There's one moment in particular that stuck out as bad editing or confusing editing, but I think otherwise your point is valid.
Sure. I don't think Cage gets the opportunity to give what I would consider to be career best performance here, just because, like you said, Chris, he's playing this character version of himself. I think Nicolas Cage, the actor, is far more interesting than this character is. He's kind of stripped down and simplistic in some ways, but obviously inspired by who he is and who the public knows him as. But Pedro Pascal absolutely stole the show. This guy, he has so much charisma and heart on screen, and the buddy comedy stuff that's happening with them is completely working for me.
Do you mind if I interject here for just a small moment?
Go for it.
The way Pedro Pascal looks at Nicolas Cage throughout the entire film is like an innocent child looking up at, like, I don't know, he's just so starstruck. Even after they start to like bond with each other and become closer, like it's adorable. I that's the only way I could describe it.
Oh, it completely is, and you totally believe it. Believe it, how.
I believe that Pedro
by
Pascal was
me
very
and
excited
Cage.
to work with Nicolas Cage. That's how much it's believable. I was like, I think he's channeling some genuine respect here.
Oh, he's excellent throughout the course of the movie. I enjoyed most of the meta elements. I think because his character feels a little bit one note, I didn't like that as much, as I'm immediately going to be comparing this movie to adaptation just because it's so similar in so many ways. And in terms of the meta narrative stuff, it's not working for me on that level. Obviously, Nick Cage plays two different characters in that movie as well, so he's getting a lot more room to act, But all in all, I thought this movie was so much fun, and I think I'd actually probably even enjoy it more on a second viewing where I'm not in a fully packed theater and able to just kind of relax into it, because it moves and it's so much fun. They weren't necessarily standouts for me, but seeing Tiffany Haddish and Ike Barinholtz again coming off of
Watch Party, Brian and I just reviewed that.
The After Party, right?
Oh, sorry, the After Party. My bad.
It was great seeing them again, even though, and they have some really funny moments as well. But yeah, all in all, I thought this was a really fun movie. I was kind of surprised that you were saying this is like top tier for you, Chris. I'm hoping that this is kind of your intro into a love for Nicolas Cage, because
the reason why it's top tier is and I didn't quite say this in the beginning. One of the reasons why I don't like a lot of Nicolas Cage films is because I can never see him as any character other than Nicolas Cage. In everything that I watch him in, the Nicolas Cage of it all never disappears. So in a role like this, where he's supposed to be Nicolas Cage, that's where it's like hitting on all cylinders for me, because I finally solved my problem. Like,
because Chris, you're watching too many Nicolas Cage movies where he's trying to be a mage. You're like, that's not a sorcerer, that's Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, so I think that's why this movie's so much fun for me, because finally it's resolved my Nicolas Cage problem, in that in all of his past films where he never disappears as Nicolas Cage, finally he's supposed to be this person. So I'm fully able to buy into it and enjoy it. But we'll see as the month progresses.
Year. We got a whole year, Chris. It's my favorite
this
film.
Is now a Nicolas Cage podcast
of the week. It is, yeah, minute by minute Nicolas Cage. I'm just trying to figure out which minute by minute podcast we become. Yeah, love all of your takes on it. I think they're all very valid. I like this movie. It's a strong liked. Like, I've never liked a movie this year as much as I've liked, just a super like on this film. But I think there's so many things that prevent me from loving it. And I think we've mentioned, Brian, I think you've touched on a few things. When I see the buddy relationship, it's honestly between him and Javi, Pedro Pascal's character. I thought of Pineapple Express. I was like, never since that has there been just a lovable fool in love with someone who is very much at the end of their rope and not sure what direction to turn, become best friends. That's the film. It's very that with light sprinkles of adaptation. So I'm all here for that. Unlike you, Chris, I think Nicolas Cage is a A-class actor. And he's been in movies where he's incredible. He's just done a lot of movies in which he's not super incredible because he's just in the most movies that anyone can be in. I think he probably has a record for how many movies he's been in, especially at like a star Hollywood budget, the man just makes a lot of fucking movies. So he works. And if you take a certain part of his career out, I think you could say, oh, he's, like a Liam Neeson type character where he's in a lot of like repetitive, but he's not. Even that, you would be like, he's ridiculous in this film and he's this way in this film. He's just been in so much shit. So I do respect him. And I really feel like this movie, at the end of the day, to me, does a bit of a disservice to him in his career. As much as it celebrates it, and there are moments that I think you can enjoy where there's a celebration of his career, there's a part of me that's like, Nick Cage can do more than even this. Like, the film itself, I think, establishes a very goofy tone very early on. It really does start jettisoning any sense of realism or realistic interpretation of Nicolas Cage as
in like the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, particularly once he goes to the party, and we'll get into where that is in spoilers and stuff, but there's a part where it jettisons kind of reality very quickly and becomes very, very silly. And I think it wasn't silly enough to be an outright Tropic Thunder level adaptation level of like, let's really just like go bonkers. But it's not bad enough as it's good enough as a straight up buddy comedy that it sustains itself throughout and is ultimately, I think, a worthwhile watch that I could recommend. But there's parts of it where I'm just not fully satisfied with the direction that they chose either way. It's not like, I don't feel like you leaned so much into the buddy comedy family drama of Nicolas Cage. I don't think you went goofy enough if you were going to get goofy. But there are some genuinely great moments throughout the film. I think from beginning to end, it constantly just has these really fun moments, whether that's, oh, this is more of a Pineapple Express moment or this is more of an adaptation moment. It has these just genuinely great moments throughout that it's definitely a worthwhile watch. I just really like Nicolas Cage in particularly a lot of films that I've seen that I might have been expecting a little bit more, especially from a performance side. I think you nailed it when you said, when you both said that, like, really Pedro Pascal steals the show, and and he's awesome in it, and it's so amazing. I just feel like for a Nicolas Cage movie, we could have had more of that. And they play with this dynamic of him having a kind of devil on his shoulder that is also played by Nicolas Cage, Nicky Cage. And I wanted a little bit more of that. And I wanted a little bit, like, if you're going to lean into that, I could have used more of that throughout. But otherwise, I think it is successful. I do not think this is going to be in my top films conversation by any means, but I'm really glad we watched it. And it made me very excited to revisit the films we're going to talk about. I bought Face Off on Blu-ray, so I'm very excited to get... Yeah.
Blu-ray or 4K?
Just Blu-ray. They do not have a 4K transfer of Face Off. So I'm very excited to jump into all that, and it's going to be really cool. But that's generally my thoughts. I think it's great. I just had trouble falling in love with this movie as much as Pedro Pascal falls in love with Nick Cage throughout. Any other thoughts before we go into spoilers?
No, I think that sums it up.
Right. Let's jump into spoilers for Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent starting now. All right, Chris, you're the most hot on the film. I'd like to start with some of your favorite moments from this film.
I think the film is at its best when it's leaning into, its most wacky elements. Like you just mentioned moments ago, his quote unquote devil on his shoulder, Nicky, is absolutely hilarious. Like it's so much fun to me that Nick Cage was willing to not only lean into this weird altered like perception of how people view him in Hollywood, even though it's not truly where he is, but then he's willing also to take it even further into this Nicky character. Like, if this is a caricature, Nicky is a caricature of the caricature. It's just so many levels of Nick Cage here in this movie. I think it's an absolute blast. Like, that was the moment where I was like, I am fully on board for what this movie is delivering to me. And again, that has to come from how I perceive Nick Cage to begin with, and how, I've never really found him to be a particularly good actor. He's consistently the same in my opinion.
Wait, so you love this movie the most, and you seem to be the least big fan of Nick Cage. That's I find that very interesting. That I'm probably the most lukewarm on the film, and I'm probably the person that respects Nick Cage the most as an actor. And as we go down into how much we like the film, you're like, I fucking think Nick Cage is mediocre as shit, but I love this movie with Nick Cage in it. What a mindfuck.
So it's I think it makes sense because I want to figure out how to phrase this.
There's no career to shit on if you don't feel like he has a career to begin with. I get you, Chris. So for a Nick Cage month, you're starting this out by going, I love this movie. It's my favorite Nick Cage movie because I hate Nick Cage. Continue.
He's willing to be a clown in this movie. He's willing to be this kind of bastardized version of how the general public views him, even though it's not necessarily who he really is. He really has built up this kind of like mythical persona over the years. There's so many rumors floating around that just like are blatantly untrue about who he is. And he's like gone on record denying the rumors as well. But he really is kind of this like mythical entity within Hollywood. And what this movie does is it entirely leans into that. And the fact that he was willing to sign on to this project and lean into it himself, not only for the Nick with a K Cage, but then into the even further, like I mentioned, Nicky portion of the movie. It's just, I don't know, it's so much fun to me. Like I respect him for doing this, you know, because I know I must be exhausting being Nick Cage and constantly hearing all these things about yourself when you yourself know that like this is not the person that I am, you know? But decades worth of legends have built up about Nick Cage.
Chris, that's the unbearable weight of massive talent.
It is. It really is the unbearable weight of massive talent. But that's why this movie is so much fun to me, because he as an actor was willing to buy into that as well and be this like absolutely eccentric and ridiculous version of who people perceive him to be. So I think that's why it resonated with me. And like I said earlier, it's so hard for me in any of his other films to be like, that's the character. That's not Nick Cage. You know, it's always Nick Cage. And this movie, well, solved the issue. Mm-hmm. So the Nicky thing.
Throw a K in there.
Exactly. The Nicky thing is the first thing that I really enjoyed about this movie. And I don't know if we want to go around and talk about our other favorite moments.
Pretty good,
Brian,
pretty good de-aging too on the Nicky character.
Yeah, it wasn't too
Honestly.
bad. When
I think it's best when you have one version of a character talking to another one, and he also is like in his imagination. Your brain automatically needs to do less legwork for like it's okay because he's not actually real. I think there's so much at play, and there's a good lesson to be learned about de-aging in that scene of, you know, you can really get away with it when you do shit like this, if that makes any sense, you know?
Yeah. Brian and I recently talked about the Atom Project and how the special effects surrounding the de-aging of Catherine Keener in that film just like really took me out of the movie. And I have to say, it's hard to compete with like Disney because of how much money they have as a studio and like all the money they're able to throw at these techs who can just continuously work on de-aging an actor. But I have to say, I think the Nicky character's somewhere in between like Marvel levels of de-aging and the Catherine Keener de-aging at like in a Netflix budget.
I don't know. Disney has de-aged horribly as well, I think.
In the early days of it, but I think they've really mastered it at this point.
They had something that came out very recently that de-aged and it looked like dog shit, but you know, they're getting better at it. So it's
what was it? A movie. I'm talking about movies, not television shows.
Oh, well, no, I mean, not so like de-aging, this is so off topic.
If you're talking about Luke Skywalker or
yeah, that was the one I was thinking of, but also the de-aging they did in Civil War, which I love that movie. It's one of my favorite Marvel movies. The de-aging in Civil War looks particularly not great.
That was like the first attempt since Tron, though, to do it.
Yeah, sure. I don't think just because they're Disney, their shit looks good. I think Disney actually for per dollar, Disney's de-aging is the worst. That's what I'll say. On a per dollar value perspective, this looked no worse than anything Disney's ever done, and it looked fine. and they probably spent way less money on it. So per dollar, Disney's is dog shit, in my opinion, for how much money they have and what the product they get. I'm going to say this looks just fine in this movie, and they probably spent a fraction of the money on it. Anyway, that's enough on de-aging.
We're insanely off topic, but just on this note, the latest episode of Moon Knight had some of the worst CG effects that I've seen in any Marvel show.
And it's not like, to be very clear,
one specific set piece
episode of Moon Knight costs more than this movie.
Yeah,
like,
most likely.
I actually think
the same,
to the magnitude of 2 to 3 times as much for an episode of Moon Knight, if I have my numbers right. The budget on this was something like 20-30 million, and the budget on
the budget on Marvel shows typically clock in at around 50 to 56 million.
This one is actually probably more, because each project gets about $250 million. Because they budget out, oh God, we are so off topic. They budget out the cost of a Marvel movie to a series of television. Moon Knight is only 6 episodes. So if they've got a $200 million budget, they're at like $40 million, $45 million an episode.
That's true.
So anyway, wow.
Anyway, back to the unbearable weight of massive talent. Brian, what are some of your favorite moments from
You're
the
not
movie,
the host.
standout moments?
Chris, you're not the host. Brian, please give us your thoughts on the unbearable weight of massive talent. I'm going to edit you out, Chris.
This is the first time I've heard this question asked to me, and now I will respond. Yeah. There's a handful of just like cringing to the point of wanting to jump out of your skin. We saw David Gordon Green show up in this movie at a lunch scene where Nick Cage is trying to... David Gordon Green, for those of you who don't know, he's a director. We've covered him he did the recent Halloween reboots, Halloween and Halloween Kills. And Nick Cage, without Green wanting him to, does a reading for him with an attempt at a Boston accent. And it is so uncomfortable. And seeing Nick Cage turn it on, and to your point, Chris, I know it's hard to see him out of character. But the
David Gordon Green, by the way, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Director of Pineapple Express.
Oh,
there you go.
Nice tie-in. Okay, I forgot about that. But seeing Nick Cage go to that insanely over-the-top degree outside of having quote-unquote normal acting around it, it just heightens it even further to show how absurd he is. And it's just like, we're in public. This guy's trying to get into a cab and leave so obviously, and he just is holding him there with this performance. And there was something so sad about it and so seemingly true to what it means to go through this casting process, even as someone who is ridiculously established. Sometimes you're just not the right guy. Sometimes people are just meeting with you because of who you are. They have to give you that option, even if you're not really considering that person. I know this can be absolutely heartbreaking as an actor to be at that level and have to go through this process still. So it just hit me like this was one of the most the moments that I felt most sympathetic for the character.
See, I think this is what pulled me out of it, because at the end of the day, the arc of Nicolas Cage, this is my most disappointing thing that like did not touch my heartstrings, right? I only like the absurd. Is that essentially Nicolas Cage is like the bad dad in like a Disney movie, or in like he's the bad dad in Jingle All the Way. Like I just recently rewatched Jingle All the Way last Christmas. And essentially, he's a neglectful father because he's putting way too much stake at what's important at work. And the whole emotional arc is the relationship between him and his daughter. And I think it works in some ways. But in this way of him caring so much about this role and it being important is to me falls a little flat. But I do like the scene in which he just starts displaying this. And you don't even know David Gordon is trying to be professional. And he doesn't even know how to react, you know. He's just like, "It's good." Like, yeah. He's like, and people are staring at them. Oh God, I just hiccuped.
You're fine.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up this relationship with his daughter in the film. This like very standard kind of narrative type that we've seen so many times over the course of the history of Hollywood. And that through line didn't even register to me as like a important through line in the film.
It's the core emotional arc of the character.
Because as soon as the movie starts to take this meta stance on what's happening, as soon as Javi and Nick Cage start to plan their film, and we as an audience go, I know exactly how the rest of this film is going to play out. It didn't seem to me to be super important to the overall, what the film is trying to do. Yeah. You know, I immediately latched on to what it was trying to do in a meta contextual way instead of like how it was traditionally trying to tell a story. Yeah. You know? So maybe that's why I also enjoyed it a little bit more. Have you seen Adaptation? I have, ages ago when we were in college.
Yeah, because Adaptation does the same thing, but then it just gets more interesting.
Right.
And this film, I feel like, comments on it and then just proceeds to do the stuff it makes fun. Like, it's a meta commentary, but then
in Adaptation, he's also not playing himself, though. You know, he's still playing someone that isn't Nick Cage.
I agree, but in the sense where you're like, we're identifying the film we're making, which happens in this movie. It proceeds to then not do anything interesting with that concept the more and more the film progresses, in my opinion.
This is where, I said in non-spoilers that not all of the meta stuff was working for me, but just quickly back to the relationship with the daughter and kind of that the element of his character. I feel like the movie misses this opportunity to, because we get a scene of him drunkenly kind of embarrassing himself at his daughter's birthday party. But I think there's something to the truth of Nicolas Cage, who has struggled with substance abuse in the past, which is part of why he works so much, which I think if that was kind of the core motivating factor, or if it was dived into a little more, we could have maybe gotten a little more where it's like that simultaneously. That's why he's working, but because he's working, he's away from the family. And the substance abuse is kind of the core of that problem that he has to balance there. I don't think it nailed that element. But yeah, sorry, I just wanted to
doesn't even address it. Yeah, no, but
right, not really at all. Yeah.
Chris, you brought up the Nicolas Cage and Nikki scenes. I think that's, again, the more the film gets ridiculous, the more it's enjoyable. But I was the most on board with the movie when we first get that like bonding with Nicolas Cage and Javi, when they decide to they talk about their favorite movies, and there is actually like where I felt the most genuine love for the movie and where I connected, obviously, as someone who's like pseudo critiquing films, is when they're just talking about their favorite movies and why they love them. I found that like actually genuine and sweet. It didn't actually make me feel bad because I was even like, oh, Nicolas Cage is describing movies better than I can right now, which is kind of a dig on me. Even though it's very pretentious and stuff, I'm like, he's very eloquent though. And he's so genuine in that moment. And that's the kind of parts that were working for me. And when, the Paddington 2 joke just got me so much.
It's so great.
The fact that Javi's favorite movies are Face Off,
The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari,
which is such an
Paddington 2.
Obscure Nicolas Cage movie. You know, no, it's the movie that Nicolas Cage really likes and he talks about with his daughter. Yes. Excuse me, not that one. I'm thinking of another one. And then Paddington 2, which he has to rewatch. And I think, honestly, that emotional beat tying back in with the daughter liking Paddington 2
most effective
is the most effective moment emotionally in the entire movie.
100%. Have you guys seen Paddington 2?
No, but it made me go, why haven't I seen it yet? I've heard that it's really, really good.
I know that film Twitter is absolutely obsessed with the Paddington series. So after this movie, my wife and I have decided that we're going to watch both Paddington movies because I feel like that's like a must now at this point.
I've heard only great things, and Paddington 2, I believe, was the movie that took over Citizen Kane on Rotten Tomatoes at some point as like the best reviewed movie of all time. I think this happened at some point in the last few years. So
I've heard people describe it as the best sequel ever made.
There you go.
It's so crazy.
Which sounds absurd to me, but I haven't seen it myself, so I can't really judge it.
I think it's perfect, and it's probably because it's nestled inside an unexpected thing of like the sequel to the movie you've never seen is great. So it's not only is it like, oh, you got to see like Shanks. Shanks is a great movie. It's not a real movie, but it's literally the opposite. Shanks 2, amazing. And you're like, what the fuck is Shanks? You're like, no, the second one is a revelation. So I enjoyed that. It's obviously kind of like a film Twitter joke to be like, oh, Paddington 2, so good. So yeah, we got to see Maybe we'll have a Paddington Pember month. There's no month that start with P. It's out. It's done. Can't do it. Any other favorite moments, gentlemen?
I really appreciated go ahead, Christian.
Oh, I was going to say the moment where they talk, I know I asked the question and now I'm answering it. When they are talking about what would look good in a trailer, it's like the best adaptation level moments of when they're talking about how to sell a movie. They dig at the Marvel and they're like, oh, everything's the same. And they kind of have these like shallow arguments that everybody has about the state of film. And I think it's like most interesting commentary, which is the fact that it's true, but also kind of played out at this point. So it's not that interesting at the end of the day. But then when they're talking about what would look good in a trailer, and there's all these moments of them holding the gun and shooting the gun, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw this in the trailer, which made the trailer better. And I'm not a big trailer boy, so to tie in the trailer to the actual movie was very funny to me.
That's precisely why I love this movie so much.
And I'm telling you, this is the moment when it was the best meta contextual argument, and that's why it's in my favorite moments, because it's...
Not only is it delivering on a meta contextual level for the film that we're currently watching, but it's also delivering on a meta contextual level in terms of the fucking marketing of the movie.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
Yes.
Okay. Piggybacking off of that, a couple, and these two go together. When the people from the CIA are trying to convince him to incorporate a kidnapping plot, and he's like, Javi is an expert on tone, and he would not go for this at all. Like, he's like, no, he will not buy this. And then when he actually does it, Javi just like psychoanalyzes him. He's like, this is guilt about your relationship with your daughter, isn't it? I was like, this is mind-blowingly good.
Yeah, and that's that whole scene, right? That's the scene when
he
they're
goes
shooting
to it, and then he brings the family there, which is like, he's just genuinely someone who didn't think through this, and obviously doesn't know Nick Cage is skeptical of him at this point. But I thought that was like really well played, and like brought some tension to a very silly movie that maybe wasn't there prior. So
no, for sure. I think the movie's
me.
peaking at this. Like that is the big peak drama, comedy, meta contextual stuff. I think at that point in the movie is when everything is working, despite I think all the foundational layers being a little flawed, especially, and this goes into where the movie started to lose me, which was pretty early, is when they brought in the CIA element, which I think is brought on very funny, but it's just at odds where you're going like, well, Javi isn't, like, I don't know, as an audience member, you're like, he clearly the fucking the dark Backstreet Boy looking brother is clearly like the bad guy.
In the middle of the second act, Mickey and I turned to each other and we were like, so the cousin is definitely the ringleader here, right?
But I do like the scene that is in Spanish mostly, which I thought was really cool. And they really let they eat up the scenery really well, is the scene when he's eating the Fruit Loops and he's kind of explaining why. And I was like, this is a tricky thing because this movie isn't that great at its narrative right now. And I knew what was going to happen in the scene. So all that in context, I still thought the scene played out as well as it could. I think executing that scene given the situation is very impressive because I think there was still a lot of tension carried over from what was happening previously. And that I did really like the straight up he's crying, and we talked about in Sonic 2 and all this, and there's just a giant Kellogg's Fruit Loops right next to it. Yes. And that to me was very, very funny, and I really enjoyed that. Brian, so you were going to mention another favorite moment?
I think it's very silly and super slapsticky, not something that's particularly original, but him, after he agrees to get into the spy craft, and he has the knockout strips that he just wipes on his face. It's so silly, but just great physical comedy that he's doing.
You knew that was going to happen the second he put it on his hand.
Of course, yes.
It's the fake out too.
You guys noticed the mouse pad?
No, I didn't. I did.
Did you guys notice the mouse pad in the security room
Of course I
was
did.
just pictures of Nick Cage's face?
No,
I did not catch that. That's hilarious.
Ooh, you point out another great scene, which is when Javi, like, it reveals his, and this is actually like following all these moments that we were just talking about.
Yeah, his like nerd room.
His lair, and yeah, that scene plays that really great.
This is grotesque.
I'll pay you $20,000.
I'll pay you $20 million.
$20,000
$20,000 for it.
He goes, I'm sorry, Nick
Javi
Cage.
just being like,
it is not
"It's
for sale. Oh my God, the moment when they switch shoes, I'm like, this is so pointless. This does not need to exist in this film, but it is so good.
Dude, I was just reveling in their relationship, like this like genuine love for each other building over the course of the film. It's just so much fun.
It's adorable
to watch the two of them together.
Okay, this is reminding me of another great moment when I think they've taken LSD at this point, but they're sitting talking.
You know what our
start getting
film needs
paranoid
is a drug
about-
scene. Yeah.
Yep.
And they start getting paranoid about the two guys who are just randomly like sitting talking by them and just hype themselves into freaking out and running away from them. That was really funny.
That's the moment the movie also becomes more meta. As soon as
they talk
Pedro
about
Pascal's
needing
like,
a drug scene.
this movie needs a drug scene.
Right,
Yeah, you know,
right.
that's the moment where you're like, okay, I understand what's happening now.
Yeah, I did find myself, I've adequately shat on this movie, and I saw it in a, it was a bigger theater. It was like a probably 200, 300 seat theater, and there was like 20 people. I saw a matinee showing, my favorite, $10 to go see a film. So yeah, I'm down for it. There's about 10 to 20 people in there. I by far was laughing the hardest out of everybody. I was outwardly laughing throughout. So I will give the film the credit that I laughed in front of strangers that I don't think enjoyed the movie even as much as I did. But you know why, Chris?
Mickey and I,
because I enjoyed film.
Mickey and I sat in the back of our theater, and there were only like 3 other people in the theater with us. And I definitely felt bad at one point because I was laughing at everything. Like,
oh yeah,
everything
yeah.
was just so ridiculous.
Yeah.
Mickey was laughing too. And like the other people in the theater were also laughing, but they weren't laughing at like every weird reference. And like, just there's so much buried in this film that's just absolutely ridiculous. Like them bringing up that he did his own stunts for Gone in 60 Seconds. Like that.
Oh, it was so good.
There's so much ridiculous Nick Cage information stuffed into this film, as there should be. You know, it's a movie where he's playing himself. But all like the kind of behind the scenes stuff that the little Easter eggs were really funny.
What's so funny about how that works is because Nicolas Cage does not remember it. Like Javi is a better Nicolas Cage aficionado than Nicolas Cage himself. He's like, oh yeah, that's right. I did drive a car, and he proceeds to
Smash into everything.
It's very funny. Oh, I wanted to bring up before we get into final thoughts. Brian, you said you like the editing. Was there anything specific? Because I want to bring up my beef with the editing. The one editing choice that was weird.
Well, maybe there was just a couple moments, and I think I remember one in particular where I was just surprised. I was just like, oh, that was a very interesting way to edit. I think they use the outline of him, to transition into another scene. Like we go to Nicolas Cage, and then we like pull in. And I can't remember, but there was a couple of just transitions that I thought were interestingly done. But the rest of the movie was just kind of like, not particularly showy. But maybe it was clumsily done. I'd have to go back. And,
it was so my problem with the edit, which I felt the most like, oh, there is some like reworking going on post production, was when he first meets the CIA, and this kind of like was like, wow, this feels like weird and tagged on and strange. He first meets CIA, and they're telling him about what he has to do at the party, and he's already at the party. And then they kind of drop back to another conversation, and it's just like time and place is a little awkward, and maybe
they're doing like a slow-mo thing of him in the party and hearing the conversation. Is this what you're talking about?
Right, because you're not sure. You know, it's a weird thing, and maybe it's a subject of seeing different film style, like just seeing way more movies than most people, where you're like, oh, okay, what they're doing is they're narrating it the potential of what's happening. Or no, they're narrating it as it's happening in the future. All right, no, they're actually no, it actually is happening right now, and it's just a voiceover the entire scene. You know, it's kind of like that. Like you have to keep resetting. Like, oh, okay. and you're not sure how they're playing it. So that could be something that's very particularly on me. Maybe y'all didn't feel it. It just felt like from when
I just read it as them talking to him in the moment at the party.
But that's weird because I think I remember the film starting with when he's talking to them about going to the party.
I think there is something weird that's happening there, and we're getting him because there's a shot of him just like staring Javi down and trying to get a read on him. It's like, is this the person that they've told me and they've built him up to be? And I think there is some weird time stuff happening. It didn't really take me out of it, but I do remember what you're talking about.
Yeah, that was just the one weird thing that it felt a little off kilter. But they do Nicolas Cage being like, listen, I'm a trained actor and I know he's a good guy.
Always trust the what does he call it? Shamanic
acting instinct or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we wrap up for the night on Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent?
Look, as our listeners already know, I fucking love this movie from start to finish. So I would say this movie is like a must-see of 2022. I think, my experience with Nick Cage can... I tried to justify why I like this movie so much earlier, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But I genuinely think that if you are a big Nick Cage fan or you just think that he's a ridiculous human being, you're going to enjoy this particular movie.
Mostly you think he's a ridiculous human being. I really enjoy it, Brian.
But he leans into he's self-aware on some level of his
Very
ridiculousness.
So.
But yeah, I don't think, to your point earlier, Christian, I'm not sure this is the movie that proves Nicolas Cage is the actor that the movie is making him out to be necessarily, if that makes sense. But
to that point, do you mind if I just say one thing while you're saying that? I don't think that's its goal.
Maybe not, yeah.
No, I feel like there is a certain amount of respect that the writer-director has for Nicolas Cage's career, and he wants it to be a celebration of his career. I would say Javi is that vehicle of appreciation for Nicolas Cage, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry to interrupt, Brian. Continue.
No, you're okay. But this movie is critically reviewed well. People seem to be... I think audiences and critics are pretty much... I think it's in the high 80s on Rotten Tomatoes for this.
I know the critic score is like 87% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Okay, yeah, I think the audience score is comparable too. So if this is someone's first Nicolas Cage movie, it's just kind of exciting for them to be able to go back and, this ridiculously lengthy career, insanely prolific, with a ton of really great performances, great movies sprinkled throughout there. So even for me, like so many of the references I wasn't getting, I need to go back and see all of his action movies from the 90s and get a taste of what he was doing back then. We didn't talk about the Wild at Heart shirt, but I appreciated the Wild at Heart shout out, even though, and in terms of David Lynch movies, I don't think it's upper tier necessarily, but it has good stuff in it, just like anything. But I think this movie's a lot of fun, and it's mainstream in a way that something like Adaptation is so, it's a Kaufman movie, so he's always very much up his own ass and gets just so into the meta that it can become a bit grating if you're not in the mood for it. Where this movie, it keeps it light enough with enough cool meta stuff that really, at the end, obviously they lean fully into it. It does we haven't talked about how it goes into the movie itself that they're filming. But I think this movie is light enough to be a good entryway into this sort of movie and has the comedy to carry this sort of basic plot.
When it transitioned from movie narrative to the movie that they were making, and like Demi Moore was on screen, my wife was like, who the fuck is that? What is happening? And then she's like, oh, okay, I see.
She made a G.I. Jane joke. Things went south.
It was all terrible.
Yeah, I think overall, I think this is a recommend for sure. I really like this movie. I like Nicolas Cage too much to think this is the definitive Nicolas Cage movie, which is weird about a movie about Nicolas Cage. So, I think...
I want to be clear. I never said that this was the definitive Nicolas Cage movie.
I know. But for a celebration of Nicolas Cage, I'm like, my standards are higher for you, Nick Cage. I think, I know that he's been in better movies. And part of me knows this was like a celebration, but I also probably feel the worst about when Nick Cage did not want to do this movie several times. It took him some convincing to actually...
It did take a lot of convincing.
To do the film. And part of me is like, oh yeah, I probably know why. And it's because, you're more than just this representation. I love you, Nick Cage, and I want you to be celebrated and not just made. But good on him for making this film. I think everybody in it's good. And I really don't think for every time the movie missteps, it always makes up for itself. And that's the greatest compliment I have for it, which is totally... I think it's a great movie. It's just, you always, when you come out, it's almost like all the Nick Cage movies that I've seen that I'm disappointed in, where it's like, I feel like you didn't go Nick Cage enough. And for a movie about Nick Cage, I'm like, I could have used more Nick Cage. Is that weird?
I don't know. You read what you wanted to read out of the movie. I would say that this is better than some of the worst Nicolas Cage movies that I've seen.
Yeah,
so
no.
Mid-tier Nick Cage.
I mean, I wasn't comparing it to bad Nicolas Cage movies, Chris. I was comparing it to great Nicolas Cage movies. See, that's where we're different in our judgment of this film, is that
we're coming from different sides of the spectrum.
There's a lot of ways that you can read Nick Cage, and I think that plays into why this film maybe can have different interpretations. But everybody should see The Weatherman. Everybody should see Matchstick Men. Just all the men movies that he's done.
Just more recently, I mean, he was just in Pig, which for the most part is a really understated and incredible performance where you don't have your classic Nick Cage freakouts, but you really show the depth that he has as an actor. He can do it all.
I want to get your take on this because I recently heard Nick Cage describe Pig as someone asked him like what he wanted Pig to be, and he said he wanted it to be a haiku. Do you get that when watching Pig?
That is a very Nick Cage thing to say. I don't even know.
Isn't it? Isn't it a very Nick Cage?
That.
My point is...
No, I think it makes sense. I haven't seen Pig and I get what he's saying. How do you not get what he's saying? It's not about... The words have to be very important and you have to tiptoe on your way to self-discovery. What don't you understand about that? See, Chris, you don't fucking understand Nick Cage, and that's why I think you like this movie way more than you should, because I don't think it does Nick Cage justice.
Wow.
Okay.
He certainly didn't want this movie to be a fucking haiku. Do you understand that?
Oh, I definitely guarantee that he didn't think of this movie as
This movie is a drunken Irish tale for Nick Cage. Anyway, it's going to do it for Unbearable Weight of... I like this movie. I don't know why I'm being so aggressive about it. You're not a real Nick Cage fan, Chris, and it shows.
I never claimed I was.
Where can people find more of your work on the internet, Chris? At Nick Cage hater.com.
Yep, I just started a new account on Twitter.
I'm twisting the narrative around you being the highest on this film, and I'm like, it's because you don't fucking really like Nick Cage. Think about that.
My new Twitter handle is at Nick Cage Superfan. No, I'm actually at Chris Conkling on Twitter, where you can find me talking about all things nerdy.
You can find me at True Pop-O-Holic on Twitter.
You can find my band at Midnight Satire. Not So Serious Man streaming now, and my EP's coming out in the next couple weeks, so check that out on your favorite music streaming platforms of choice. Next week, we are talking about Paddington 2. I'm very excited about that. It's going to be a good conversation. No, we're diving all the way into Nick Cage. What are we doing? Are we going chronological? We actually haven't actually...
Face Off.
Face Off. Ooh, shit.
Or are we doing...
No, Face Off.
I believe Leaving Las Vegas was technically came out first, right? Do we want to start with his Oscar-winning performance, or do we want to end with it? That's the real question.
We should probably end with it. Listen, I'm all about doing Nick
Face
Cage.
Off it is.
I think we should go right into the fun. I think we should...
Let's do it.
Let's go full Nick Cage.
Well, Nick Cage, John Travolta. Let's fucking do it.
Absolutely. Can you imagine if this Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent was made, but John Travolta was the main character? It's a guy that was really obsessed with Saturday Night Fever.
I don't don't know if it would be as fun.
Big swordfish guy.
Yeah, I just fucking loved you in Swordfish. Yeah, I mean, think about it. Saturday Night Fever, Grease, Swordfish. Those are his career.
And oh gosh, what was that movie that came out a couple of years ago?
That was
The Fan. Is that one?
He has not had a critically well-received movie in over a
it's
decade.
been a long time. It's been a long time.
He did do a weird Christmas music video with Miss Presley. I don't know if you saw that.
I did not. No.
It's weird.
Thank God this movie was about Nick Cage.
What else has Travolta been in? I'm trying to think. Of like big. Oh, Pulp Fiction. I mean, he was in Pulp Fiction. That's pretty big.
Yeah.
That's pretty high. The Unbearable Weight of Massive Scientology. That'll do it for this show. We'll see you next week on